Today's sellout game is proof of football's enduring appeal. Despite tough economic conditions, last season, more than 30 million fans attended games in the top 4 English divisions. Football remains a national obsession. Last season, Tottenham generated a record income of nearly £120 million. But 20 years ago, the balance book was very different.
Tottenham Hotspur won today's FA Cup final for a record 8th time, beating Nottingham Forest at Wembley by 2-1 after extra time.
Despite winning the FA Cup, the club was struggling to stay in business. Multi-millionaire Alan Sugar decided to step in.
The previous week or a couple of weeks, there was lots of talk about the club going into bankruptcy because it owed £11 million. And I just had this mad moment thinking I will do something for the community and buy the football club. Clearly, it seemed like another challenge in life.
He bought Tottenham for £8 million and spent 10 years as chairman. But running a football club proved to be a difficult business venture.
Anderton to Klinsmann!
I bought Tottenham for £8 million and in 2000 sold it for 50 million approximately. So on the face of it, most people would say, well, that seems a very good business transaction, a good deal. Actually, personally, it wasn't. I spent far too much time involving myself in a thankless, what I thought was a thankless task at the end, and took my eye off the ball from my core businesses, and that's something that I'll never be able to recover.
With its fast pace and star players, English football is a major export. Premier League matches are beamed into 500 million homes around the world. But despite the game's global appeal, there's growing concern over its financial health.
I think the financial state of the game is precarious, but it's true in any kind of business, however much the income is. If your expenditure exceeds your income, you still run at a loss, and nobody can run at a loss indefinitely.
10 out of 20 Premier League clubs make an operating profit. Taking into account the cost of player trading and debt interest, 14 of the 20 clubs are in the red, with average annual losses of £27 million. Total debt in the Premier League stands at £3.3 billion, 4 times higher than Spain's La Liga and 7 times higher than Italy's Serie A.
When you look around, you see that the collective debt of all the clubs is £3.3 billion. Most of the clubs are in the red. They're spending more than they're actually receiving. It's incredible. No, it's certainly not a business.
West Ham was bought in 2006 by an Icelandic consortium, which had made a fortune in banking. The new owners had big plans for the club.
I come here, you know, to achieve great things for West Ham.
The Icelanders splashed out £30 million on a host of star players, but then global events brought an end to their ambitions. The credit crunch arrived, and Iceland's economy collapsed. West Ham was put up for sale, but saddled with a massive wage bill and huge debts. The club looked like a bad investment. Then 2 local boys made good. David Sullivan and business partner David Gold stepped forward, buying a 50% stake in the club.
I remember very clearly, I don't know where I was abroad somewhere, and I had Sky Television on, and I saw you in your press conference very eloquently dealing with the media.
It makes no commercial sense for anyone to buy this club. There's still £100 million of debt here.
What the bleeding hell are you doing here?
Well, we're back in our hearts, and we've invested all our funds and more. If this was any club other than West Ham, we would not be buying it. We bought this as fans, we bought this as supporters, not from a business point of view.
You're a clever businessman, clearly. There was no shock to you when you came into West
No.
Ham. You knew what the debt was. Okay, so it wasn't a case of suddenly opening the books and going, bloody hell.
You know, we love the club, we're passionate fans, we've not done the best deal, but we also believe we will turn this club into a club worth £500 million.
Sullivan's first boardroom signing was Karen Brady, former managing director of Birmingham City.
Kenny Lowe drilling one. Oh, what a goal! Kenny Lowe!
So, when you went into West Ham, surprised? What did you see there? Where do you think it went wrong? Clearly there was something wrong.
There was no control within the organisation whatsoever, and because it was seen that it was being run by a bank, so therefore there was no set percentage to turnover that was spent on wages, there was really no structure, there was no communication. The whole business was, quite frankly, out of control.
I'm forever blowing bubbles.
The new owner's biggest challenge is reducing a wage bill that exploded under the Icelanders.
They had an unsustainable business model where the wages were 91% of turnover, and if you add to that agents' fees and a few other little bits and pieces...
91% of turnover?
91%.
Unbelievable.
West Ham started giving people 60, 70, 80,000 pounds a week, which 4 or 5 years ago was huge money, and huge money for a club of this size, and more money than Tottenham have probably got no one on £80,000 a week now.
No.
West Ham had someone on £80,000 a week 5 years ago. These are bills we've inherited, which we're having to work through.
A move to the new Olympic Stadium will help boost the club's match-day income. But for now, West Ham is dealing with the massive debts built up by the previous owners.
How do you pay off the debt? I mean, where's the money coming from?
Well, we raised money by selling more shares.
Right.
And also we cut the costs, so we created more income within the organisation.
So you think because you've cut costs, income's going to come in, it's going to pay down the alleged 100 million, I think David talked to me about?
Yeah, and in terms, if you think about a London club owned by English owners with a track record in business, being run by myself, I think it's quite a compelling story as, for an investment. If you look at what we achieved for the investors of Birmingham City, it was a good story.
Sounds a good story, yeah.
No, you want to buy into you?
That sounds a very good story.
How much should I put you down for?
You don't mind if I duck the opportunity at this moment?
West Ham was saved from financial collapse, but another Premier League club were less fortunate. 3 years ago, Portsmouth's players were lifting the FA Cup. But last season, the club was awarded a very different distinction.
Portsmouth has become the first Premier League football club ever to be put into administration.
Like West Ham, Portsmouth had fallen under foreign ownership, but after spending millions on new star players, the losses and debts became too much to bear.
Is a very sad case. You know, they spent all that money, got various players on very high wages for a club that can only attract 20-odd thousand people, and people within the game knew that it could only end in tears.
Portsmouth's lavish spending resulted in debts of over £120 million. More than 400 businesses were owed money, including a local joinery firm, owed £50,000 for work to the club's ground. Under rules unique to football, one group of creditors are guaranteed payment in full. The football fraternity look after themselves.
Under current football creditor regulations, the Portsmouth Football Club have no choice other than to pay approximately £15 million owed to other member clubs and approximately £10 million owed to former players' wages. And those two groups of creditors will be paid in full.
As players' salaries have risen, club debts in the Premier League have grown to £3.3 billion, the highest in Europe. But there's another reason why English football has topped the European debt rankings, the so-called leverage buyout.
A leverage buyout really is just a term for a buyout that involves a considerable amount of debt. The idea is that you can borrow more cheaply than you can find people to invest in the equity, so you have a lot of debt in the transaction.
In 2007, one of football's most famous clubs was bought up with huge sums of borrowed money.
This is it.
Two American businessmen, Tom Hicks and George Dillett, took out bank loans of £300 million to buy Liverpool Football Club.
they will come to realize the affection and respect for the heritage and legacy of the franchise and our appreciation, I use the word franchise, but of the club.
As the cost of servicing the debts mounted, Liverpool headed into the red. By 2008, the club was paying £36 million a year in interest on its loans.
The acquisition of Liverpool ultimately was heavily funded by debt, and of course, as that situation unravelled, as the team's performance on the pitch didn't match up to expectations and that produced financial pressures, the banks then came in and took a very active role.
One of the club's main lenders, the Royal Bank of Scotland, had almost collapsed in the credit crunch. Now owned by the taxpayer, it called time on its loan to Liverpool. As the fans took to the streets in protest, the club was on the brink of financial disaster. At the 11th hour, a deal was done to sell Liverpool and pay off its debts. But 30 miles away, another famous club is still paying the price of a massive leverage buyout. 6 years ago, a family of American tycoons bought Manchester United with £500 million of borrowed money.
The Glazer family from America bought Manchester United for £800 million in 2005, and £525 million of that was borrowed, and around £275 million of that was borrowed from 3 hedge funds that were charging absolutely ridiculous rates of interest, and then they made the club responsible for paying the debt. So Manchester United, which had no debt before, was placed purely by the Glazers' takeover into £500 million of debt.
Over the last 6 years, financing these debts has cost Manchester United an estimated £350 million. Last year, concern over the club's borrowings turned the Theatre of Dreams into a stage for supporters' unrest. The Premier League says Manchester United can bear the debt burden.
I understand the fan concerns, but my ultimate concern is whether it's sustainable or not. And currently, right now, in the current economics and the way Manchester United is being managed and run, very successfully, and even more commercially successfully than it was before the Glazers took over, that debt is sustainable.
Do you agree with me when I say that it wasn't really buying the club, was it? They came along in that period of time when there was ridiculous lending going on with banks. You virtually go and take any asset, the bank will lend you a lot of money. But there, what you're actually doing is someone came in and said they bought the club. They didn't. They borrowed money, and 70 or 80 million pounds at the time was being paid across to pay off the debt.